in this movie, we're going to take a look at image planes. Now, we use image planes to bring in an external image, whether it be a drawing or a photograph of something that we're trying to replicate or something that we want to integrate our 3D objects into. So, for instance, we may want to take a 3D object and place it within a scene. Therefore, we might bring background images in or a movie, so to say, and use that as reference so that ultimately we can incorporate that 3D object into that two-dimensional background. Now, we also use it as a reference image so that we can copy certain things from that. For instance, we might copy colors. We can actually sample colors directly from an image plane, or we might use it to trace the outline of a drawing or photograph in order to get the proportions of a model. Let's take a look at how we would bring in an image plane. Now we have a couple different areas that we can do this. We can go to View in the actual viewport that we want the image and choose View, Image Plane, Import Image. And you'll also see we have Import Movie. Regardless of which one we choose here, the node is the same. So basically, if we choose import image, we'll be able to load an image up. And then from that node that it's created, we actually have a checkbox that we can turn it into a movie if need be. Of course, you have to make sure that it's the proper file format and that it is more than one image there. But these are essentially the same things. This one here just automatically turns on an extra little checkbox. Now we can also go into our viewport and choose this icon right here, which will immediately take us to our browser, and we can load our image through here. And lastly, we can go to Create and choose Free Image Plane, and that will also create the image. Now that's probably the longest path, only because we still have to load the image to this individual node. Now I'm going to leave this up and we'll just go into our attribute editor. And we've already broken that off here, so it's just a separate window. And if we scroll up to the very top here, we have a browser for image name, so we'll just click that. And I'll load my background image, or in this case, a reference image. I can choose it, and I get a nice preview of what that image is before I load it. And now that image is brought into my scene. Now, currently, it is being displayed in all of my views. So you can see it here in the perspective. It is in the side and the top, and of course you can see it right there in the front. We can choose looking through camera only so that it is not clouding up our other viewports. In this case, I'll just switch it to front. So it really doesn't matter where you start. You're always going to end up in the same spot here, whether you click this icon or go to view and import your image plane through the viewport itself. We can always make these changes from within the image plane shape node. And therefore, basically, we can move it to any viewport that we need to. Now, when the image comes in, it's not always exactly where we want it. In this case, it did center up nicely in our world, but I can hit W and just bring up my move tool, and I can relocate that image anywhere I want. Essentially, this is just another object, another node in our scene. And I'll just hit Control Z just to return that back. Now I am on the shape node. So if I choose the up arrow, you'll notice now in my channel box that I went to image plane 1, which is the transform node. So now you can just see when I move it, it is actually getting transformations there. Now oftentimes when we're modeling, and I'm going to create the sphere here just so we can see, we want to use those background images to help us create the model. But right now, the image plane itself is splitting my model in half. And I'll switch to a quad view here. And let's reselect that image plane and go into the attribute editor. And we'll choose all views just so we can see this a little bit more clearly of what's actually happening. So that image plane is splitting my model right in half. Well, what that means is if I were to select parts of the model as I go in and alter the shape of this object to fit it to be a crow, but if I just grab those points, just some random points there, and I lift them up and I'm working in the front view, notice I can't see what just happened because that image plane is blocking it. So what we normally do is we'll select our image plane and we'll move it in a specific axis so that we can see our model in its entirety and that the image plane is not interfering with our workflow. Right now, because I'm looking in the front view, means I'm looking down my Z axis. And you can see that blue Z right there. I'm looking directly down it, which means I want to move my image plane in the Z axis. And I want to move it away from my view. So that's going to be a negative value as I push it back into 3D space. So I'm just going to do negative 100. All right, now it seems like a big distance. When I hit enter, it just pushes it back. We don't alter the scale of the object. And this is a good thing. Now I don't get any of that distortion that we would normally get with a perspective camera. This is great. So now I can push it back in the negative value. And now I can see that model and the changes that I made to it. Now, the other thing we can also do if we scroll down in our channel box or if we're working inside the attribute editor, same thing, we're going to see the same attributes. If I go to alpha gain, I can set this to a lower value, which will give my image plane some transparency. Now, even though it's pushed all the way back in the negative, I do like to add a little bit of transparency, just makes it a little bit easier to see. If we were to take this and move it all the way back in the Z, you can now actually see the difference there. Parts of the model that are behind the image plane still show up because our image plane has some transparency there. So it really doesn't matter whichever way you like to work. Those are two different methods or a combination of both to model with an image plane and use that image plane as a reference. Now, if that image plane comes in and it's not big enough, we can simply scale it and you can also rotate it. It's a free object, so you can kind of manipulate it and move it wherever you need to. When we're done with it, we can simply select it and hit delete on the keyboard to get rid of it.